Okay, so this is a 2004 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor edition of this vehicle. I do not know if the non-police Interceptor are different. They very well could be, because there are definitely subtle differences. These have bigger sway bars. Sometimes the brakes are different, suspension's different, etc. So there is a good chance that this may not fit a regular Crown Victoria or non-police edition. But I just got from Detroit Axle on their eBay account, right where my pointer finger here is pointing, which is the wheel bearing hub assembly. This entire piece right here, all of this right here. Right where my finger is pointing, you can see I've already taken the bolts out, and they're sitting right here in a square fashion. 1, 2, 3, and then down here 4 on the opposite side coming in this way. You're going to need a 14mm or 9/16 socket. You're going to need a 15mm socket and wrench as well. The only reason you need a 14, I believe, is for these. This is the brake caliper assembly, and this piece that it's attached to has the brake pads in it, and that piece, which you see these big holes here, actually fit here, 1 and 2. So if you don't need to replace your brake pads, and your brake pads are fine, then don't mess with anything else on this except for those 2 bolts, that one and that one, which again fit right here. This whole thing will slide off. At that point, your caliper, or excuse me, your rotor, which is here, will slide off, and then it looks basically like this. So I don't need brake pads. These are pretty got quite a bit of meat left on them, so to speak. So once you get these bolts out, now the front facing ones, front of the car facing ones, same goes on the opposite side of the car, the ones that face the front of the car, you can pretty much get out with the socket and that 15mm socket and ratchet. This side, however, the back facing side of the car, a little bit more trickier. If you have a swivel type socket like this, it comes in handy. I was able to get the top one off with it. But first, before you do that, this side, you know, the right side or the back facing side, the one that's back here and the one that's back here. Now I'm not talking about these. I'm talking about the wheel bearing hub now. This one and down here, the other one coming in from the back, you need to probably break it loose with a 15mm wrench. And the way I did that, put it on here, and then got that hammer and hammered it till it broke it loose. Then did the same thing with this one. Now these don't move very much because you don't have much wiggle room with the ratchet, with the wrench. Once I broke them loose, I was able to use this and get them off the rest of the way. Now the right side of the car, passenger side of the car, I wasn't able to use this on the bottom one for some reason. It just was too tight for some reason of a fit to get in there. But if you have still more trouble and you have to use these wrenches, I'm going to hold this with my knees. You can basically take a wrench like this, put it on here, and then take another larger wrench or about the same size wrench and do this with it. Now you've got some leverage, and you can use that bigger wrench with that smaller wrench as leverage to keep going. These bolts, see if you can see that. I mean, this is a 2004 vehicle. You see that little discolored spot right here? That looks like Loctite or some type of thread sealant. And when I took these out, I could tell once I broke them loose, they were still tough to get out. So when you go to put them back in on the new one, you're going to want to use some type of thread sealant as well. And then when you go to tighten them, I'm going to go to the other side now. Here's the new one. I've already got this one back together. I went ahead and replaced both. You can see how shiny this one is. This is new. But once you're tightening up those back ones that were harder, that I said you had to use the wrench, you really do need to probably put some good leverage to tighten them up quite well, because just breaking them loose was quite tough as far as what I was expecting. So I know that they're on there tight, and they put the thread sealer on there as well as an extra safety precaution, because if that thing ever came out, those 4 bolts, this is coming off, your tire is probably going to end up going down the street somewhere. So when you go to tighten them, keep in mind that one that I said that were in the back side, those two that were hard to get the ratchet on, and I had to use a wrench. Don't think you're going to be able to use that one single little wrench with your hand power and tighten it to the proper specs that I know that this thing probably requires, which are significant. So what you could do is do that leverage technique where you put the two wrenches together and then tighten it, or get a hammer and pound on it a bit too as you're tightening it, you know, so that the hammer gives it a nice little extra snug tighten on there. That will probably be sufficient, but you got to put the thread sealer to be safe back on there. Now once you get the old one off, right, you're going to have this cable. This is the brake sensor, ABS cable, wheel sensor cable, and it comes with all brand new connectors to keep it attached to the vehicle. All this stuff was brand new on the cable. It came with it. I didn't have to put any of this on there. Now I'm going to show you this old one real quick, because you may find just getting this thing out is difficult. You're going to see this connector right here, and normally it's inside, snapped in there. So you can see these two little square holes. You got to stick a screwdriver, a thin one, in this hole, because ultimately what you're trying to do, see that little clip, that little L looking thing, you're wanting to put pressure on the back side of that inward so that it can snap out through the top. So you're going to have to put a screwdriver through here and then kind of wiggle it, twist it, that kind of thing, so that you know this thing has pressure pushing on it. And then get another screwdriver. Again, this is going to be snapped inside. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and snap this one for now, since this is junk. So you're going to put your screwdriver in there, and then get another screwdriver and wedge it where I'm trying to wedge my finger right now, and pop it out to the top. At the same time, this is used, this is old. If you wanted to cut the damn thing, or just rip that plastic off, like, you know, a caveman, go ahead. But if you just want to gently pull it apart as it was intended, use the technique I just told you. Other than that, there's nothing else, except when you get to the driver's side, the air box needs to come off. It's very simple. You got two screws here, that mounted right here, and you've got one that mounted right here. Actually, they're nuts, not screws, they're nuts. So you got 1, 2, 3, they're visible. You can easily get them off. Move this out of the way. Now I end up taking the this tube, hose, or whatever off so that I can move this out of the way better. It just takes a simple flathead screwdriver. And then you have the connector for that ABS sensor right here. On the passenger side, you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's right there. It's sitting right there waiting for you. So that's it. Anybody can do this. You don't have to be mechanically inclined. You just have to understand that, especially if you've never done anything like this in your life, this is a wheel bearing hub assembly. If you don't tighten this down properly, that wheel could very well fall off with all the pieces attached and just go rolling down the street and smash into a car. And at a high speed, it could be quite devastating. The proper thing to do would be get a torque wrench, but you may need one of the smaller size torque wrenches to do the job properly, because I had a hard time getting one of this size to get in there where I could use it properly. You got to turn the wheel and do stuff, but I don't know the torque specs. You could probably find them online. Ford Crown Victoria wheel bearing assembly torque specs, and you could find it, and then you can use a torque wrench and definitely torque it down to the proper setting. However, how are you going to get that torque wrench on those two back ones that I told you were difficult? And it's not wise to use a swivel type of socket when you're trying to torque something. It's just not. So you almost have to just use those two back ones and say, okay, I'm going to tighten them hard as I can by hand. Then I'm going to use those two wrenches together, tighten them by hand, and then after you're done, give them a nice little smack with the hammer to just a little bit more, and make sure that you know they're tight enough. And of course, use the thread locker type sealant, whatever, on the threads. That helps them from backing out. And hopefully what would happen is you'd start hearing noise as you're driving down the street. Okay, my front end feels weird, steering wheel's shaking, I'm going to pull over. And by the time you pull over, all the bolts didn't fall out on you, and at least some of them stayed. That's part of what thread locker can help do, so that the bolts don't back out real rapidly, as well as keep them right where they are, never back out. But again, just be careful is all I'm saying. I used to be a mechanic many years ago. Sure, every single thing you take apart has a torque spec. I didn't know too many mechanics that ever really looked at torque specs unless it was something major. You're doing some engine work or transmission work. Doing a brake job, we never did torque specs. Take stuff off, tighten it, you know, you've done it a million times. We never had a car come back with problems. So again, just be careful. That's all I'm saying. And that's it. Now, one other thing that I noticed is that there was a video on YouTube, and I also looked around, and they showed vehicles that look similar to this with the Crown Vic, but it had a 35 millimeter large nut in here that screwed onto some type of piece that also had to come off. So I was expecting that on mine, but when I came out here today and took it off and even looked at the new ones, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I don't have that. All I had was these 4, which is great. It makes it a lot easier, because that other one, you definitely want to torque that one properly, and I think it was 220 foot-pounds. That torque wrench I just showed you only goes up to, I think, 100 and something foot-pounds, so I can't even go that high if I want to, which is good because I don't have that vehicle. I don't have the nut. I've got the very basic, simple one. It does not take long at all to do this. That's it. So hopefully this helps somebody out there. Take care.